G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza and this is a video tutorial on motion in animation. Animation really is motion when it comes down to it. They're pictures one after the other that create the sense of motion. But we're going to talk in particular about a few things that we can use on objects and characters to bring that motion into a little bit more of a believable visual spectrum. So for example, when a ball's moving across the screen, rather than just having frames of the ball moving across, there are things that you can do to stretch and squash the object to create more of an added illusion of motion. So the first thing I'm going to mention is this book right here. It's called The Animator's Survival Kit. And it's fantastic. It is incredible, seriously. So in particular, if you're interested in learning things about motion in animation, timing and framing and all that stuff, this is the book to get. Anyways, jumping straight into it, I have a piece of animation that I did for a client that has allowed me to use a portion of in explaining this sort of thing. And it is of a Pokemon called Throw, grabbing a rock and throwing it. I'll show that again. One more time. Okay, and so there are a few things that happen in this clip that I want to point out and use as an example of these aspects of motion in animation. So the first thing we have here on the top left is normal. So this is where his proportions are totally normal in his free fall form, and then at the very end when he's standing still, there are no changes in his figure, and that's fine. That's just kind of the start and end place. Then we have squash. So we're going to go through in more detail through each of these, but I'm just going to go through them for now. Then we have stretch. Squash and stretch tend to go together or one after the other. Anticipation and release also tend to go together or one after the other. And then we have smears, which I have done a video exclusively on. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about animation smears, then you can check that out on my channel. Excuse me. So the first thing is normal. There's really not too much to talk about here. Basically, when you're animating and there's not too much motion, but you're going through frames and adding in between to go from one pose to the next, you want to make sure that things are consistent and maintain proportions. That's all I really need to say on that. It's pretty given. The first was not first, we've done the first, but the second thing that I want to talk about is squashing. So squashing is when we have the impact. It's the first frame of the impact where we can, if we choose to, squash, distort the object or character to give an added sense of that impact. So in this case, this character fell and slammed into the ground. And on the first frame of impact in the ground, I warped his proportions and squashed them. So flattened them and pushed them against the surface that he pushed into. So for example, if you're animating a bouncing ball, on the first frame of the actual impact with the ground, rather than just have it sit there as the normal proportions, squash the ball. And to be honest, I was quite mild in this squash. I just wanted to keep things fairly simple, but you could really like Looney Tunes it up and just really squash things out and warp their proportions. Which brings me to my next one, which is stretch. Now, stretching is a little bit opposite to squashing because the squash happens, bam, on the immediate impact and then releases back to normal proportions. So you can see the first frame was the squash and then the next two frames release back into normal proportions. Stretching is a little bit different because it's pulling into something. So stretch is a increase of motion into the movement itself, and in this case he's picking up and throwing a rock, and the stretch is to show the resistance. The resistance in this case is the rock itself. It's quite heavy, and I wanted to show that the rock is heavy and he's having difficulty moving it. And so in doing that, I began with fairly normal proportions here on the left, and then as he moved across to try and throw the rock actually barely moves. So if I were to place these directly on top of each other, the rock moves very little, but his upper torso and shoulders move quite a lot, which leaves only one thing to move and stretch, and that is the arms, and they are bearing the weight, and that is what the stretching does. So there are lots of examples which you can use to stretch. Jumping off from the ground is an example where you can use stretching because it's the lead into emotion and things like that. So I hope that's a bit helpful. The next thing we're going to talk about is anticipation. Anticipation is a pose which you can put between the initial pre-action pose and then the final conclusion of that pose. So in this example, we have him standing here and looking, or he's not standing, kneeling, looking at the rock that he wants to grab. And the final result is over here on the right, the rock, and he's grabbed it. Now, in theory, you could just have him go forward and grab it. But what we're doing is we're accentuating the motion by bringing him back before he comes forward. And that's actually something to keep in mind in a lot of aspects. For example, with a punch, if you're punching someone, you're not just going straight from here to here. You're actually going from here back and then forward. So every time that there's a large, forceful push of animation, we need to create the force for that animation to build up the energy, and that happens in the anticipation, right? So we can't just go bam, we got to go bam. So the anticipation is like the, right? Does that sort of make sense? The next thing I wanted to talk about was release. So the release often comes after the anticipation, after the contact of the last pose. So in this example, I've got the rock being thrown, and then the release is often quite a very subtle thing. Like these three frames are quite similar to each other, but there is the motion from this going to this, going to this. Okay, so the release is when our body just kind of falls back into a neutral position after the extreme action has finished. So we don't just finish the action and then we're completely still. We finish the action and then there's a small unwind, and that's what the release is that I'm referring to. Then the last thing is smear. Now, if you want to go into more detail into this, go to my channel and in the search box, just type smear, and you will be taken to the smears in animation video. It's quite useful. There's some really good resources, and there's a Tumblr page dedicated to animation smears. But as you can see, it's a way of communicating specific concentrated motion in a very short period of time. If there wasn't a smear in this case, while the motion would just be displayed in the same way, it wouldn't be as accentuated, and that's really what this tutorial is about in the end. The smears, the releases, the anticipation, the stretches, and the squashes turn something normal into something that is over accentuated and communicative of what we're actually doing in the animation. So I hope this tutorial has been useful. There's just a few tips to keep in mind. If you want to download the reference file to actually look at this animation itself in detail, you can do that by clicking the link in the description. Otherwise, that's it for this week, and until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you later. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoy my videos. You can download the reference files from this tutorial by clicking the link in the description. And remember to share any art, animation, or game you make on Newgrounds.com. Until next time, see you later.